Tony Caravan.
You've been subjected to a highly sophisticated form of propaganda.
It's just what you need, and not what you don't.
Took me a long time to find those cows this morning. I had to go through my audio collection, recorded audio collection. It's crazy.
Good morning.
But good morning, folks. Tony Caravan with you for another edition of Tony Caravan Live, the morning show. And I just got a notification from YouTube. I'm checking out my file. What's going to happen when the farmer leaves the farm? Well, if you haven't been watching the past couple episodes, I've kind of coined an anecdote. Yeah, anecdote. It's early. I'll tell you what, yesterday I was drinking hot coffee. Today, I've made my own cold brew. I was telling someone yesterday, I said, you really can't. What is a cold brew? Brewing. But what I did was I took my instant coffee with a little touch of this French vanilla, cocoa, whatever. Put it in my container, which doubles as something I can put in a blender, but I didn't blend it. Excuse me. Hit the mic. Blending is a possibility. By the way, for those just tuning in who've never been here before, Tony Caravan Live always begins with a little bit of what I call housekeeping. So, let's just bear with me. So, I put it in, I mixed it up, shook it, gave it the old bartender shake, and put it in the refrigerator overnight. And now I'm drinking it in my morning show camping mug, the metal one, which I say is better for cold drinks, I think. And quite frankly, I'll tell you the truth. I started this out with Starbucks, their cold brew. I literally purchased the Starbucks cold brew. And then I tried the Dunkin' Donuts cold brew. In fact, several episodes back. These are the morning shows. And sometimes some people are confused. I started to say this yesterday, but when I watched the replay back, I realized I didn't finish the thought. Just because it says it's the morning show, it just means it's live in the morning, but it's archived, for as long as the internet stays up. So these shows, you look at the title cards and maybe the description, and maybe not, because sometimes I just get totally out there into some stream of consciousness. But these are all hour or 2 hour shows within their own right that are well worth looking at any time. I think you're always going to glean something from them. I mean, it's the purpose. I mean, I do this with a distinctive purpose. So just, I didn't finish that thought yesterday. And as I always say, I never like to leave people hanging, at least the regular people that tune in. Our audience is growing on some of the more fringe platforms now, I noticed. On some of them I'm getting, we're in the thousands of viewers. YouTube is still, I don't know, a little bit sluggish. I just don't know if they're really putting up true numbers. I also place these on Twitter and of course, on YouTube too. And there are 2 other sites that I occasionally publish to, but they require me to do a separate download. In other words, I have to download the live file, and then upload it to them. And that gets back into the whole reason why I started doing live in the first place, is that I used to produce these shows and it used to take me hours upon hours. And in fact, sometimes almost most of my waking hours to go through the various processes of downloading, uploading, editing, and all that stuff. And it's like, I am, as I say, I'm demonetized. In fact, this show I actually lost $32.50 on already because the farm pickup in the title I actually bought from a stock art photo company that originally was like 60, $4, $65. But because I signed up, I got 50% off. But I wanted to get that point across about there are certain things that I've coined over the years, like the word, look at these bird killers ruining that landscape, right? People's energy bills went up. There's fields of dead birds underneath here. These things have a short lifespan, right? And they're just downright ugly. And they require all kinds of carbon-based fossil fuels to manufacture, and they are, while they look small, that's a very big, tall distance up there, which requires cranes and whatnot to hoist them and do all that. And then they just end up looking like they catch fire sometimes. No one wants to claim responsibility for them, etc. I just want to get that out of the way. But which made me totally lose the trend of thought of what I was trying to say. I hate when that happens. Something about my shows. I don't know. My Louis Armstrong handkerchief. Well, whatever one of the things I was going to talk about was a taste test. I was talking about the Pepsi challenge. And so, in effect, this is where they used to challenge Pepsi and Coke and something else and say Pepsi won or something like that. Whoever sponsors it usually wins. Well, I tried Starbucks cold brew, Dunkin' Donuts cold brew, which gets some high ratings among some people, believe it or not. They call that donut shop coffee, right? And my home brew, which is basically just I'll tell you what it's like. It's an instant coffee. I was going to give you the brand name, but they're all the same. I prefer Folgers, but I'm not sponsored. What I was trying to talk about was that I've coined these phrases. This is I came to my mind, so I'm not losing my mind. Having written so many books and having been writing essays for so many years, decades and decades. I originally coined the word vidiot, meaning video idiot, vidiot. And I know people have used that word that has like made it across. But, from a copyright standpoint, I think if you look through my books and early copyrighted writings, you'll find that I was the first one to ever to coin the term vidiot. And the same goes with the word corporatocracy. I notice people are starting to use that. Some people will use that. Some people, they also use technocracy, which isn't mine, but corporatocracy is mine. And that's the one where I always put my hand up here and say, they're the people pulling the strings and, politicians are marionettes. But the other one that I've coined, which is more of a phrase, is the idea of the farmer abandoning the farm. Because we're on a tax farm. I'm not the one who first came up with this concept that humans are cattle on a tax farm. And what I did was I was the guy who added to it /consumerism farm. And that is a reality. And I get into that late in the last couple of episodes. And I wanted today's show to focus more on that. And that might be our point of departure. And we'll see how far we're going to get with that. One of the crazy things before I do get into that I wanted to deal with was this. Weekend weather. And yesterday I brought up, this thing here. And apparently it's happening. I'm in the mid-Atlantic states. Doesn't matter. My face is darkened out on this. The idea is to focus on these numbers. And this is just a personal note for me. Prepare for Friday's wind. And I was listening to the weather radio, which I recommend everybody get a capable weather radio, no weather radio, whether they get the one on TonyCaravanLive.com or just see if they have one laying in their old garage or their grandparents or somebody has one laying around. But apparently, and this will probably be countrywide, because when this kind of thing happens, today the temperature is going to be like 74 degrees, and which is like crazy. But tomorrow it's going to be high winds. And according to NOAA, there could be gusts over 60 miles per hour. Now, that's like low tropical storm winds. Like when I was talking yesterday about, I lived in Florida on the Gulf Coast for a while. And yeah, that's pretty crazy. So, it has to do with, like, what happens is, we're dealing with the temperature. The way this works meteorologically, it's like the isobars. The closer the isobars are together, those line. When you look at a meteorological chart, you'll see these lines on it, and the closer together they are, the higher the wind speeds. When they're farther apart, the less. And it's also tied into that idea of when you have converging weather systems. So in other words, if you get unseasonably warm weather, on a particular day, it's like, so in other words, a cold front comes into where it's very hot, or vice versa. That's usually like a recipe for a storm situation. In the summertime, you're talking thunderstorms and things of that nature. Big bad thunderstorms with lightning and stuff. And so what we're going to be seeing, I think, at least I know for sure in the mid-Atlantic states, but I wouldn't doubt if that doesn't extend a little southward and perhaps even a little westward, is be prepared for some very strong winds. And I wouldn't call these unseasonably strong winds. I would call these basically just, anomalous strong winds. And part of this has to do, and there may be those that would argue this, but we have in yesterday's title card, I spend time on these title cards. They're not all the greatest, but generally speaking, they do tell a story if you look at them. I had a picture of the sun in the background yesterday, despite that little green monster on the front. But there was a sun and there was this solar ejection coming out. And the idea is that, we have a weakened magnetic field right now. There's weakened solar magnetic field. There's some cyclical things going on in our solar system, and on the planet, that are putting us in a position right now that we should be seeing more anomalous behaviors and things that cyclically do happen. So it's not like as if anything, the fear mongers and the people, the tax collectors, right? Those who would have us be cattle on a tax farm, and just want to create some kind of alarmism about a certain thing so that they could maintain their power, and make money and tax it and all that stuff. Try to ascribe these things to, degree Celsius or CO2 in the atmosphere. Has nothing to do with that stuff. Weather, that kind of stuff has nothing to do with that. No, these are cyclical things that the Earth goes through over It's like the sun. The sun has solar cycles that, like 11 years. Sometimes they stretch out longer than that. Those are the short cycles. The sun flips its poles on a fairly regular basis. North is south, south is north. Um, we have 400-year cycles. We've had something I talked about before, the Carrington event that occurred like well over 100 some year, actually 100 and could be 130 years ago, 140 years ago. We had telegraphs at the time, and it basically burned the telegraph wires and the telegraph stations. Recently, they've discovered that they believe there was another one like that some years prior to that. And what that means is that this may well be, we don't know, because the further back you go, the less technology, and these things would have been unnoticeable. The only people who would have noticed a thing like this would have been like Inuit peoples, people living in in the extreme northern latitudes, uh, or northern latitudes, who might have seen some sort of thing, lights in the sky, aurora borealis type of lights in the sky, something along those lines. Because without, in the absence of technology, you're not going to have, a telegraph station, you know, wires burning and equipment just lighting up, if that equipment doesn't exist, never existed. But it seems that these things may happen on a cycle, and we're probably due for one of those. Now, if one of those happened along the lines of, like, say, the Carrington event, which is, you can look that up yourself, we could be looking at a grid down situation, and especially the situation that our grid is in, um, because we get power failures all the time. Uh, I just was scanning. I don't know why I did it, but I joined is probably the wrong word, but I mean, I'm in some kind of one of these groups, that local type groups, where commute people, talk about issues in their community, you know, whatever. I didn't even know the name of it. I'm not going to mention it because, somewhere and somebody out there just, want to, like, or troll you or something for it. But, to make a long story longer, hey, I found there's a lost dog. I found a lost dog. Is it anybody in the neighborhood lose a terrier? Whatever. And, so I've been noticing on there, in more frequency, people complaining about cable outages and power outages and things of that nature. And, this is nothing new. If you I don't, like I say, I don't have the TV news anymore, but I follow what's going on. I like I said, I try to keep my, finger on the pulse of the nation. But, California had brownouts. You see this all over the place. You see power outages and stuff. And then, and just for the sake of either poor management of power grids, old power grids, or in situations like what happened in Florida, was a combination of a rare storm, but nonetheless, the type of storms that do happen. People trying to pretend, put that up to some kind of climate thing. It's like, no, it just hasn't happened since the youngins, on the TV selling used cars, were born. But it's happened before, and it'll happen again. But it was also mismanagement and lack of foresight and cost cutting, um, on the part of the people in government and utilities, that made the problem worse. It's kind of like even forest management, poor forest management. It's like, you're going to have forest fires no matter what, since the beginning of time. It's actually part of nature. Like I said, I forget what tree it is. I don't know if it's a pine cone. I don't know which one it is, but there's actually one that actually it has to burn. The seed pods has to burn in order for it to be able to, you know, grow. All right. Think about that. So, I mean, that's how natural they are. And of course, lightning storms, has been a part of our planet since as far as we can go. Yeah, this isn't bad. This my own homebrew. Though obviously and I do feel a little bit of a caffeine buzz from it, but it's obviously not, I don't have as much as I would have. I don't have a big enough container to have made a big batch. Okay, so now that we got to that,
let's get this show on the road.
So I was going to give you the weather forecast, but maybe we'll just turn that into
Good morning, Vietnam!
Anyway. Good morning, folks. So let's get into this idea. Now, we're cattle, okay? Farm animals, all right? And at least that's the way the Davos set looks at us. The corporatocracy. The people that the real rule, so-called the old world order. Forget about these conspiracy theorists, nonsense woo-woo people that talk about the new world order and the Illuminati and all that nonsense. It's like, forget that. I messed around. I was a member of I'll be frank with you. I was a member of a secret society, so to speak, when I was 30 some years ago myself, because I've explored everything over my life, and without revealing any secrets, let me tell you, the people who criticize these things, they're clueless. They're clueless. The real enemies of out there, the real bad guys, to use simplistic words, are what I call the corporatocracy. And that is those that attend Davos every year, the World Economic Forum. You go to the World Economic Forum. I don't know. I haven't been there recently, but, big bold letters, the Great Reset. And let's take advantage of, this thing, the plague or whatever, to usher in the Great Reset. These were the same people tied in with the UN who wanted Agenda 21 and end up changing it to Agenda 2030. Okay. And so this is the idea. And the thing is, we are, and just to answer someone on the chat, no, we're cattle. And to them, we're cattle. Maybe not to us. It's the same thing as someone enslaving you. You're a free man yourself, but someone may consider you a slave and may enslave you in ways, all right, that that are beyond your ability. So they view us. If you look at the U.S. as an example, the U.S. has long been a tax farm, and the powers that be, that I now call the corporatocracy, they view the people as cattle. They treat us as cattle. In other words, our purpose is we're on a tax farm, all right? And as long as we are productive, okay, then that's fine. And when we're not, they so-called put us out to pasture or butcher us, right? And the final sale in America and most countries is have you sign over all your belongings and put you in a nursing home or a long-term facility. That's the same thing as going to the butcher shop, all right, and being butchered and sold off in pieces. Okay, as horrible and horrific as that may sound, I've added the idea that it's not just a tax farm, but it's a tax consumer farm, because when the corporatocracy took over, it's not as if there wasn't a government. All right. Government did exist. And in some small areas, government still exists, in localities, in certain areas, certain counties, you still have that type of governance that isn't entirely influenced by the corporatocracy. And what I mean is financial interests. But it's very hard. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. If you really look closely, practically every politician is in the pocket of some company or some power financial interest. And some of them are just, thugs, mobsters. Some of them are corporate, legitimate corporations, if you could call a corporation legitimate. The people that, or just, people that donate to their campaign that expect a favor. Their son gets arrested or something like that. And it's like, hey, I donated $10,000 to your campaign. You got to erase this thing against my son because I want to send him to, to a good college or something like that. I don't want this on his record. And politicians do favors. That's the elite, the ruling elite, right? So to them, the common man, the average person, we're just cattle. That's all we are. And what I'm trying to propose here is that, well, first of all, politics is dead. It's only being kept alive. It's a ruse right now. Politics as pop culture, the cult of personality of certain politicians is being kept alive because it's in order for the media, right, and the politicians to finish. There's two things going on right now. One, the Agenda 2030, the Great Reset, is not completely implemented. Last year, this is some real interesting stuff that people just aren't. Nobody's talking about this stuff. Last year, during whatever, like I say, get out. I'm not interested in the politics of it. I'm not interested in the ideology. I'm not interested in the, politics is made for TV. I'm not interested in any kind of sides and all that kind of stuff. I used to be. I like everybody else, but what I'm talking about is whatever happened last year, whatever you want to call this plague thing. I don't want to get into the details of it. I have my own personal ideas on it. And everybody has certain, viewpoints on what really happened, what's going on, and what the lockdowns were about, and what these, muzzles are all about, and all that kind of stuff. That's not the issue. That's part of the whole, scene, the whole tapestry, the whole, mosaic. It's there, but I'm not going to get concerned with that. What I'm concerned about is the fact is looking that it did occur and that it was taken advantage of in a certain way. And what happened was it allowed the central bankers in the US, like the Fed, and in Europe, the central bankers, because the central bankers, basically, International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, like I say, the World Economic Forum, the Davos set, like I say, I keep doing this all the time. The real puppeteers, the people that, the multi-billionaires, the people who sit on the same board of directors of multiple corporations that have all these foundations that are just fronts for them to channel money back into themselves and not pay taxes, right? They, their idea tied in with the UN and the EU is this idea of a world government. And that's what Agenda 21, which they changed to Agenda 2030. Just like they changed global warming to climate change when they realized that the climate wasn't actually it wasn't warming, and that there was more and more evidence showing that the Earth is actually cooling, which can be documented. But I don't want to get into that argument right now. It's not what today's show is about. So these people, they managed to pull trillions of dollars, capitalize in the last, say, fiscal year during this crisis, as they called it, trillions of dollars out. They call it one of the, whenever these happens, they always call it like the biggest transfer of wealth. It's like back in 2008 when they had, the real estate crisis, so to speak, and they transferred all that wealth to themselves. And so they've been making these money grabs. They did it back in the 80s with the when they got rid of the SNLs, the savings and loans. Okay, that was the beginning of the end for the U.S. That's when the U.S. empire began to, gradually just kept falling and sinking from there. A lot of people think a lot of this stuff is recent. They want to put it on certain political figures, like I say, cult of personality figures. They're all a bunch of clowns. There might be there's a few good people out there that have noble, that entered politics for noble reasons and, have consciences and maybe moral fiber and ethics and all of that sort of thing. But they're few and far between. And the things they talk about, and what they hope to do, they never accomplish because it's an exercise in futility. The media will give them the time of day to make certain people feel good as if, oh, there's hope, right? The worst thing that's come along in the past, I would say decade or so, is this whole concept of hope. They twist this and they give people false hope. But the reality is politics is dead. There are no governments per se. Like I say, apart from maybe certain local, county, or certain areas where that still function in some manner that is just kind of off the radar of, as if of the people that, that run the world. It's like me, I don't know, on the back of one of my books or on one of my websites, it says, one of the most under the radar figures in modern pop culture. It's like, if you're under the radar, they don't necessarily care about you because in their mind, you're no threat to them. So they just, that's just the way it is. And, it doesn't bother me. If you don't have an ego, who cares? And that's why dystopia, as I call it, which is about to happen, and we're going to get into this in very deep detail today. This is the theme of the show. Why it's not going to be widespread and a Mad Max world, is going to take over. The corporatocracy is primarily concerned with it. First of all, is the farmer. If you look at the title card again, and I should have printed that out. I could do it and then hold it up, but and maybe I will do that. What the heck? So bear with me, folks. I'm just going to do something here. I'm going to print this out because I know people watch these. If you're like me, I actually watch YouTube on my TV. That's my primary way of viewing it. But I broadcast it on this. But what people have to really realize is that, and I want to get back to the comment on politics is made for TV. Politics is indeed made for TV. Let me just grab this off my printer. Just take 1 second to do this. I'll give you some birds chirping while I do that. I spent about a half hour digging out sound effects because I was looking for the cow. And that's why yesterday I said I actually spent money because I wanted a classic photo. And I had this vision in my mind of a farmer getting in his pickup truck and just leaving the farm. And I searched far and wide and I found this stock photo from a stock photo company. They wanted to charge $65 for it. But if I signed up for this stupid mailing list, I got 50% off. So I actually paid $32 for this freaking thing. But it totally fits. You know, it's amazing how you can find stuff, you know. It totally fits the idea. And the point here, even though it's not perfect, I would prefer he just be in that pickup truck going up the road and there be a fence there and those cows left behind. But that's my idea. What's going to happen when the farmer leaves the farm? Okay. And so we're cattle on a tax/consumer farm. And you get a guy, like I said yesterday, Jeff Bezos, who made more, Amazon made more money than ever. The car sales last year had a banner year, right? Used car sales. That's what the media really is. Politics and, political ads, used car ads, and pharmaceutical ads. That's what the media is. And all the news readers you see on the media are all multimillionaires. On the local stations, they're all making even six figures. And what are they selling? Used cars, new cars. They're car salesmen, right? Just like politicians are like used car salesmen. It's like Wall Street traders these days. In the old days, some people may not know this, but you used to have what they call bookies. And before they had the daily number and lotteries were legal. And this goes way back. You had these guys who were, wear the fancy suits and they would go in. They're the same guys who used to shake down, businesses like mob type guys. But these weren't necessarily mobsters. They were just bookies. And they would, go in and people would play the number. And the number used to be based on some treasury, the last three digits of a treasury thing that came out every day or something weird like that. I forget what it was. But these guys were always the fancy suit, had the roll, their money in that rubber band roll, the big shot guys, right? Big shots. Well, when that all ended and lotteries got legal and all that kind of stuff, the bookies were out of business. So where do all these like shysters type of guys go? The big shot, where'd they end up? They ended up going to Wall Street. And so now you got a bunch of guys on Wall Street and they're just bookies. They're just 2-bit bookies, right? They're shysters, they're con men, they're car salesmen, right? That's what they are. And so the idea I was trying to bring out about this is that if the corporatocracy views us as cattle on a tax/consumer farm, and last year you had companies like Amazon have banner years. I think even Walmart, because people were ordering all the stuff online, right? And you had Jeff Bezos making net worth went to $60 billion. $60 billion. Think about that, man. $60 billion. I think he's the richest man in the world right now. Well, anyway, he recently left Amazon. He's got $60 billion. That's about it. There's nowhere to go from there. And it wasn't too long ago that Bill Gates left Microsoft, right? Because he's up there too. And I don't know the order of, of all these people, but they all know each other and they're all up to the same game, So, and they go to Davos and they, that's their thing now. They play. That's what I was talking a little bit about yesterday. The game of life is like these people play the game, and they're the ones rolling the dice and moving the characters around the board game. I'm not talking about an online game, something like that where you're slaying dragons and getting points and all that kind of stuff. No, that's amusement, that's entertainment. You know, you do that, that's just escapist fun for people that want to do that. No, I'm talking about the game of life. It's like a board game, an old-fashioned board game, and where you have, paper, little, like paper money or little cards to read, and you have little characters, that you are a moving thing across around a board, maybe dice to roll, or some sort of, or you pick a card and you do some kind of thing. All right. Well, the Davos set, that's what they are. They're the people playing that game, and we are just on. We're not. We're the board. We're on the board. Okay, we're not. We're not players. And you've heard that name player has come up, in many times over the years with people like, hey, he's a player, right? Well, yeah, we're not players. The average person isn't a player. In fact, in today's world, you could have a million, 2 million, couple $1,000,000, and that's not enough to be a player. One time it was. One time millionaires were considered players. Players today are billionaires. And that's a fact. And so these players, they get together at Davos, they get together, the World Economic Forum this year. That's guy Klaus, who's come up with this great reset idea, coined that. And they basically there's the board laid out, and they have their meetings and their PowerPoints and all that stuff. And they're playing the game of life, the game of the planet, basically. And they're deciding everyone's fate, the fate of countries, the fate of everything, and you can't imagine it. This isn't like the game of Monopoly or the game of Risk or the game of any particular one game. Imagine every board game you ever saw as a child. All right. Ones in which you had armies, ones in which you had piles of play money, ones in which you pulled certain cards and get out of jail free cards, ones in which you had little thimbles or little characters that went around the board, ones where you bought the boardwalk property, ones where you got the girl or something, whatever it is. I mean, imagine every possible board game you've ever seen, combine it together. All right. And that's the game of life. And so these guys, they decide, so it's a combination. I don't know if you ever heard of the game Risk, and some of these games where countries can, you could take over countries, as opposed to like Monopoly, where people take over, buy up real estate. Basically in Atlantic City, that's what Monopoly was. And that's what these guys do. They're playing the game, the game. And we're not, we're like buried in that. We're the pawns. It's not even like a chess game, where we're, we're a pawn or a knight, or or the queen, king, rook, castle, whatever. It's not even like that, because the chess part of that game would be that second level down from the corporatocracy Davos set people that pull the strings, the real players, right? They have their knights, okay? They have their castles, all right? And so that's part of their hierarchy, the way the world really runs. Elected politicians, like I keep trying to say, and I'm going to say it every time I'm on, they're down here. They're the lowest of the low, okay? In fact, they're lower than we are, really. And we get to that because there's no reason why you can't be free. See, politicians are fools, because it's like, not only are they on a fool's errand, but they're naive. It's like the bureaucrats and even the spy agencies today. Like people think, yeah, they still have power and they still can do things and they could mess you up big time. All right. But they're clueless about that they're below, they're pawns, to the corporatocracy. This world is run by a corporatocracy, big tech, all right, with its big data. And its big data is more data than the NSA, CIA, and DIA combined, right? And these CIA, NSA, and DIA people are so naive that they think, well, we're in partner with them and this, that, the other. It's like the CIA storing some of their data on Amazon servers, for crying out loud. Government is being systematically, completely, totally, absolutely, dismantled by the corporatocracy. And the media is, and there's this big ruse and there's this big thing going on with the media, like as if the media is just trying to sell you used cars. All right. But the corporatocracy is not, it doesn't care about selling you anything. They are ruling the world. They managed to yank out a couple of $1 trillion last year, and they just yanked out another couple $1 trillion this year. Right? Where you think that money goes to? Yeah, they sent the people some money, but that was nothing. That was in the hundreds of billions, but they got trillions out of it. So they're at a point now, and the reason I bring up the farmer analogy, which I've created, okay? And I told this to a friend of mine last night on the phone, and she, she's an animal lover and stuff, and she was actually saddened by me saying that. She particularly likes, as an equestrian. So she thought, she's thinking the poor horses or the poor cows. But what I'm trying to get at is, yeah, there comes a time when Bezos and Gates and all these various other Davos set people, where they have the Great Reset finished. All right. Agenda 2030 is in place. And it's not going to be like flipping a switch. I say this all the time. It's going to take 6 to 18 months for this to really transpire. So you have some breathing room and time now to get yourself set up, get yourself dealing with this reality. But what happens is eventually, just like Bezos left Amazon and Gates left Microsoft, and I could go, I could rattle off, dozens and dozens of these Davos billionaires that, have all made so much money and just basically have pulled themselves out of their companies. They don't care about us. They never did to begin with. Okay. We were only ever cattle to begin with. All right. So they don't care. So when the farmer gets in his pickup truck, you've got cattle on this farm. All right. Let's think of this. There's cattle, and there's a fence, and it's a farm, and you had a farmer before. And the farmer used to come around. The farmer probably had a family and farm hands, cattlemen, and all of that, right? And they would take care of the animals, make sure they were fed, make sure the fences were fixed, make sure they had water. When it was cold, made sure that, they could go into the barn, or they had shelter, places where they could shelter under in a storm situation or whatever, because the cattle had value to the farmer, right? They were valuable, whether they were milking cows and getting milk, whether it's chickens and they were getting eggs and selling them to market, whether it was, whether it was meat that would be eventually sold to butcher shops, right? It was the livelihood of the farmer, the cattleman, the rancher, all right? All right. Now, that cattle was pretty much dependent on the farmer, because, they had a pasture, they needed the food, and what have you. Now, the farmer has his pickup truck. In this instance, he's got binoculars on and he's looking out over the herd. Okay. So maybe this is his last look, right? Or maybe this is a couple of years ago, before. But what happens when he gets in his pickup truck, throws his bags in the back of the truck, and just drives off into the sunset, right? And now you've got cattle, and they're, just left. Well, they're going to eat eat the pasture, chew their cuds, what they can. I guess eventually the bulls, like I mentioned yesterday, will probably eventually, when they get very hungry, when the pasture's like a totally, gnawed down to nothing, they'll just keep pushing at the fence. By then, the power electric fence, if it was an electric fence, may have, no longer have any power in it, or it won't matter out of desperation, because humans are the same thing. Think of the book Animal Farm too, by the way. Put that in the back of your mind. If you ever haven't read that book, Animal Farm, read that. And the bulls will push down the fence because there's greener pastures on the other side of the fence, grass that hasn't been eaten yet. And then beyond that, because most farmlands are usually in wide open spaces, they'll end up in, out in, wooded areas and start gnawing on trees or whatever, and maybe eventually make it into cities. And as someone had said, the pigs normally do that. That's what people on farms use pigs for to begin with. They use pigs to clean out areas, because pigs will eat anything, right? So they'll, if you want to open up some new space on, and if you got a lot of land, people, they put the pigs there. They feed them a little feed every day, but the pigs will basically gnaw down all kinds of brush and all kinds of things that you don't even want, including poison ivy and stuff like that. It doesn't affect them. So so the cattle just goes wild, becomes wild, right? And that's the state that we're heading into. That's the future. That's like where we're going. Now, to most people, a lot of people, this is like a shocking thing, or it's bizarre, or it's sci-fi, that kind of thing. But it's really not. And then there's other people who might listen to me and say, well, that makes sense, but that's kind of scary. That's pretty scary. I'm afraid. And I'm not here to like fear monger. I don't believe in that kind of stuff. No, the thing you got to keep in mind is that wherever you live, and it doesn't matter, particularly Western civilization. So if you're, Western, and when I say Western civilizations, even Australia, they consider themselves part of Western civilization. It's just because of the crown and, speaking English and all that kind of nonsense. But wherever you are, there are big cities. All right. And so as the desperate, starving cattle, all right, start, breaking their pens, knocking over their fences, and going to forage for food. It's like the looters in the cities. When you see these riots and you see people looting, there's some quote, I forget who the guy is. They say most people are 9 meals away from, of like totally losing it, of going, crazy, and just no more any kind of moral fiber they had, whatever. They'll do anything, desperate, 9 meals away from desperate acts. But the thing that you could take solace in and not be really totally afraid of, and why I try to tell people all the time that you should try to get to a point where you reduce your exposure to the corporatocracy and also reduce your cost of living, all right, and your ability, but not your quality of life, okay? Because that's not what it's about. You know, life isn't about surviving. You know, life's about surviving and, like I always say, and thriving, living well. All right. Even if you have, people who have problems in politics who are still caught up, still have that itchy thing in their brain that's like get eaten at them about some political thing or ideological thing. What I always tell them is the classic old line: living well is the best revenge. Forget about, putting a sign in your hand and going out and protesting and all that stuff. Exercising futility, waste of time. Okay. Just like television is a waste of time. News readers are just people selling used cars and pharmaceuticals. All right. The news media is collapsing right as I speak. They're desperate. They're barely above water financially. They're laying off people right and left. Nobody's watching. The ratings are going way down. This is TV. That's why I'm doing this. This is TV today. And I like it, and it's raw. And and my show's raw, right? No pretensions here. I don't go back and edit out anything. I screw up on this show all the time. The next day, if I say something, I forgot to say this, or I said misspoke or whatever, the next day I'll get around to it and say, oh yeah, I was, I meant to say that, or I meant to say this. But the traditional legacy media, mainstream media, whatever you want to call them, they're falling apart. They're part of. They're just like the politicians. It's as if they didn't get the memo yet, or they don't know that they're obsolete. It's like the bureaucrats and the alphabet intelligence agents. They still think they're important, but they don't know that, that they're not. Well, we have power. We could do this. Yeah, they can. Right. They can. But they don't understand that's fading. Right. It's the same with politicians. Yeah, they could pass a law and do this and do that. Right. They still have, but it's fading, and they're not seeing the forest for the trees. They're not aware. And so with every day they become more and more insignificant and irrelevant to our society. So as when the farmer, and I'll hold this up a few more times before the show's over. When this farmer finally leaves the field and those cows are left alone, imagine that's Los Angeles, Chicago, New York, Atlanta, right? Philadelphia, North Philadelphia, Seattle, Portland, even places like Dallas or Miami, right? There's all these major, places, megalopolises, they call them. Places where you have millions and millions of people sandwiched together, who are becoming more and more unemployed and less likely to be employed in the future. What I was doing with my little flashcards a couple shows ago, trying to show that. And you've got all these immigrants coming in the country for the American dream, but the problem is they're 50 years too late. The American dream ended 50 years ago. There's no jobs in America. In fact, by the fall of this year, I'm predicting there'll be anywhere from 30 to 50 million people unemployed. The corporatocracy, the farmer is leaving, all right? The corporatocracy has basically pulled everything out. They have enough to maintain control over what they want to do. See, you have to look at it this way. what if you owned a corner store and you sold, I don't know, you were a baker and you made bread, rolls, cupcakes, and, occasionally made a cake for somebody's birthday party. All right. And you and your family just ran that store, or you and and you had an employee or two, a guy baking in the back, and you were behind the counter, and your kids or wife or somebody was, you know, taking care of people or something. Well, you would have a business plan. All right. You know what your rent is, or if you own the building, you know what your mortgage is, your taxes, or whatever it is to have that bakery shop. You know how much it costs to keep the lights on, to heat it, or if it's in a hotter climate, the air conditioning, right? Whatever the city, the license fees are, the various expenses, your basic expenses to operate that business. And then you have your employee expenses, how much it costs to pay your employees, and how much you want to take out of that business so that you could live your life and pay, for your house, your mortgage, or whatever you want. And of course, you have to buy your, your dough, your flour and whatever, your raw ingredients, sugars and stuff to make your various baked goods. And so you have that all figured out, that you need X amount of customers in order to be at a level that you can pay your bills and make enough money to make a living. All right. That's your purpose there. You're not trying to get rich. You're not trying to franchise. You're not trying to become a millionaire, anything like that. All you want to do is pay, you like being a baker. You like owning the baker shop. You like living in that community, right? And that you just want to keep doing that, right? And so you might say that, and you live in say it's a smaller community, corner place, corner neighborhood type bakery type shop. Yeah. So what do you need to do that? You might need, in the course of a month, 1,000 customers, say. So say you need 1,000 customers. And if you get 1,000 people coming in there buying bread, cupcakes, rolls, and the occasional birthday cake for a birthday party, some custom thing like that, and maybe once or twice a month, you might cater some event at something where you make special, some kind of specialty baked goods. But you found that all you need is 1,000 people a month in order to live a good life. Pay, your life is good, your employees get paid, your taxes are paid, you have the property, everything's fine. Okay. Now, the community grows, all right? You don't need, the population increases by twofold, all right? Well, you don't need more than 1,000 people, and you don't want to expand because it's not a big building, and you're happy with doing what you're doing. So those other people, they're going to have to go somewhere else because they'll either be this big line out the store, or when people come in, you'll say, "I'm sorry, we're all sold out of cupcakes, for the day. We're sold, or bagels or whatever. We're sold out of whatever we made." And so people won't, so the regular customers will come in. They'll know to come in at 7 a.m. or whatever, when the stuff's hot hot out the oven. And that's that. Okay, so now let's take that to the giant, bigger world. Excuse me. I mentioned this before, but all these things bear repeating because they're just not talked about by anybody. And I'm basing this on the United States. So 100 years ago in the United States, there were 100 million people, right? In the 70s, 1970s in the United States, there were approximately 200 million people. And right now in the United States, there are approximately 330 million people. Okay. So in less than a century, the population basically went from 100 million, right, to 50 years ago being 200 million, right? So it doubled in 50 years. And now, and technically it's trebled since then, since whatever. So it's like because we're probably at about I think the US really has about 350 million people, because there's the way the figures lie, liars figure thing, which I talk about all the time. It's too shady when you look at census numbers and all these agencies. They all have different like reporting methods and different things. Like, so they don't report migrants, what they call undocumented people. They don't, it's all a big game. But let's just say it's went from in the past century, America has doubled its population in 50 years and added another 100 million plus, actually technically 130 million by the end of that century, that fiscal century, so to speak, because we're going from like the 20s to the 20s, right? 1920s to the 2020s. All right. So if you were able to halfway through, the century, through that time, say in the 70s, which was a really good time in America. The 70s was probably one of the best times in America. The 60s were tumultuous times. There was a lot of problems. You had your civil rights movement, you had the feminist movement, you had the Vietnam War, right? There was all sorts of things going on. But by the 70s, by the time you reached the 70s, like 74, 75 and so, the Vietnam War was over, the civil rights movement was over, the feminist movement was over. In other words, America had arrived. Those were good times. And for about 10 years, America was was a dream place. It really was. It was a dream place. And so, and then it started falling apart from the 80s on till now. Some people think it's like recent years that this has happened. It just started falling apart. So, yeah, and world population is now about 8 billion, and 100 years ago, there were only 3 billion. But I'm trying to put this in perspective for this idea. Remember, we started with the baker store in a neighborhood that had 1,000 customers, and that's all they wanted. They needed to make a living and wanted, because they didn't want to expand. They didn't want to franchise. They didn't want to do anything else. All right. So in other words, if you're customer 1001, when you come to the door, I'm sorry, Mrs. Jones, we're out of cupcakes, right? We're out of bagels. We don't have any more French bread. We don't have that, right? And we're not baking anymore. The oven's off for the day. And so now let's look at, so now we're talking about the United States. So you had 100 million people, all right? Then you had 200 million. And so we're fixating on this 70s time, this like the golden age of the modern era in Western civilization, the mid 1970s, okay? Vietnam War is over. All that civil rights unrest and the feminist movement, all that stuff was settled, right? A lot of people today don't, you wouldn't know that from like turning on the news or watching anything, that was all settled. That was like settled then. And there was this time, and it was just a great time. And you didn't have, the price of fuel and cars and appliances and motel rooms and houses. Everything it was like you could do whatever you wanted to do, as a young person, right? You could buy a car for, you could buy in the late 60s, you could buy a Volkswagen for $800, $900. All right. In the 70s, you could buy a small car or something like that for $3,000 or $4,000, 5,000 tops. You could buy a car. People had bought houses in that era in the 20 some thousand, range, that eventually they sold and retired to Florida, and they sold them for 150 or 200,000. It was crazy. It was a crazy time. But at that time, a couple starting out could literally, it was the American dream. All right. Now the corporatocracy at that point, and as time progressed into the 80s, that's when they started to mess with finances, right? The savings and loans problem, where they get rid of the local savings and loans, and the Fed really, I mean, the Fed started 100 years ago. The central banking system get us off the gold standard, and then in the 70s they got rid of silver. And so what happened was they systematically started to it caused mass inflation. All right. There was a time they used to have something called compounded interest. And you could put in, at one point, there was one point in in the US where you could get as high as, on a certificate of deposit, you could get as high as 10% interest on that. So, but it was like at least 8% interest. But you have to think about that. How much? So, in other words, if you put $1,000 in, you would get $100 in a 90-day CD or a 6-month CD. And you could roll that over. So in 1 year, you could make $200. And then you would roll that over. And it was called compounding interest and whatnot. And so eventually people had they would invest that way. And even in checking in savings accounts, they had compounded interest, and people kept their money in the bank for 10, 20 years, even leading up to that, with even smaller interest. And people, their money was making money, where if you actually were someone lucky enough to be wealthy, to have had some kind of windfall profit, or a business that brought in enough money, you reached a point where there were people just living off of their interest. So that you had retirees in those days that they just lived off their interest. They took their interest payments, or they would just get their check for their for their whatever they earned on theirs. They would just keep rolling it over. Anyway, that's all over now. It's long been gone. It's done. But the corporatocracy, somewhere along that time, between the 70s and the 2020s, was like the baker shop. And the baker shop, and they reached a point where there were too many people, too many potential customers, too many consumers, too many, basically, cattle. They didn't need us anymore. Okay? They don't need us anymore. There's too many of us. And that's why guys like Bill Gates constantly make speeches about depopulation, and many of these other people. It's all about depopulation. And what's scary about a guy like Bill Gates talking about depopulation, he's like the single largest individual owner of farmland in the United States. He also has an interest in these vaccines and things like that. Do you want a guy who's out making speeches about, depopulation, being in charge of the food supply and medical things? I would say that's pretty scary. All right. So now when you deal with this, so the farmers, there's too many people. They don't need us anymore. They have no moral tie to us. They're not related to us. They don't care, right? So they're just going to leave. So they leave the farm and leave us alone. And we have to fend for ourselves. And, some people will break through the fence, like I said before, and, forage and do whatever they do to survive. Now, this is the thing that you have to keep in mind, however. There are very few people that talk like I do about this kind of stuff. All right. And this whole farmer idea is one of those things that I definitely coined that concept, this analogy. However, I've lived in Los Angeles. I've lived in New York. I've lived in Washington. I've lived in Philadelphia. I've lived in all these places, lived and worked, and I've traveled abroad. So I know these places, not as a vacationer, as somebody who's lived and worked in those places. Okay. So I know the lay of the land. I know what it's really like. All right. Not like somebody who said, oh, yeah, well, I went to New York. We went to New York one time for Times Square for whatever. We went there for our honeymoon. No, you don't know a city when you go for your honeymoon. You got to live and work there for a couple of years and ride the subways, grab the cabs, meet people, have relationships, have coworkers, learn about this, that, the other, walk the streets and find the, off the beaten path places and stuff. Really get a feel for it. Like I say, take the pulse of the nation. All right. And I did that. That's why I did it. That's why I do what I'm doing now, because I did that. I did that years ago. Right. So I was able to retire younger because most people were like, they still wanted to like experience the world. And it's like, man, I did that. Right. I'm just telling you the way it is. I'm glad I did what I did and where I am when I am. So the farmer leaves the farm and the cattle's left to fend for itself because they don't even need the cattle anymore. Right? Bezos is $60 billion. What does he need? He doesn't need any more. Okay. It's a whole different world. It's not 60 million, it's 60 billion. So what happens? Well, the reason you don't have, if you live in New York, LA, Dublin, Sydney, right? Berlin, right? If you live in Dallas, Atlanta, DC, Philadelphia, Seattle, you got to worry, okay? Because when the fit hits the shan, all right, when you saw last year on the news all that looting and all that crazy stuff, that's going to happen in those areas because those are the high population centers. That's where you have all these millions and millions and millions of cows and cattle, together. But what you have to also understand that nobody talks about any of this stuff. But what's not really talked about is that those areas are huge. I know because I've lived there. I've flown over them. I've traveled them. I've driven around them. And so there are decades worth the plunder in Los Angeles area. There are decades worth the plunder in the greater New York area. There are decades worth the plunder in Philadelphia, decades worth the plunder in Dallas. All right. And then you have the thugs, the drug dealers, the gangbangers, and people like that. But they all have a hierarchy. And I got into this a little bit yesterday. So, the various kingpins, from the low level street dealer to the person who supplies the street dealer with his supply, to the person above that who supplies the supply, that supplier with the supplier that works their way up. They don't even know who the guy at the top is. Usually the guy at the top is the corporatocracy, and most likely it's big pharma or it's the military industrial complex, like I said, protecting the biggest poppy fields source of heroin in the world is Afghanistan, right? Well, there's been a war going over there for 20 years. They could have destroyed those poppy fields, right? Instead, they had troops protecting it. I've talked to guys, right? Well, why didn't they just, drop the mother of all bombs on the poppy fields? It's a question I'd like to know. Because there's no such thing as government. Because the corporatocracy controls the military too. There's ice cubes in there. That's what that clicking noise is. It's my end of my last cup of iced coffee. See, ice cubes. So don't worry so much about that. I mean, it's not going to be a Mad Max world. You see? That the cities are, there's just, I mean, think about it. Well, maybe you can't think about it, because if you never lived in LA, or if you never lived in New York, you have no idea of just what vast expanses they are, and how many retail outlets, supermarkets, and everything else there are. So there's literally, you can't gorge yourself. It will take years and years and years for these people to loot and to get rid of this stuff. It's, I always get a kick out of when I watch these dystopian movies, and it's as if every gas station and every grocery store has been looted to the extreme, right? And it's like, no, man. They talk, I watched something yesterday, on some YouTube guy was talking about, they have, the inventory at local supermarkets is what they call just in time inventory. So they don't stockpile a lot of food the way they did in the past at major chain stores, right? They have truck deliveries coming in all the time. And they say once that chain is broken, then there'll be starvation. But what they don't talk about is where, is the distribution centers and the stockpiles of all these kinds of things. All right. And that you might not be able to get, depending on where you live, if you're a person who's like expecting to have steaks, unless you raise your own cattle, and eggs, unless you have your own chickens, which you can, have chickens are, lay eggs every day. But unless you're worried about that kind of thing, and you don't have to drink milk, milk is, that's a thing that people, you don't need milk. Milk is for babies, right? Get over it, Just make sure you have fresh water. All you have to do is put a seed in the ground, and you got food. All right. Then there's canned goods, right? And packaged foods and things of that nature. And there's literally tens of thousands in America alone, tens of thousands of towns that are outside and hundreds of miles away from these city centers that will become dystopias. All right. The average person right now doesn't even know that there's in the Pacific Northwest, they're still rioting, in those towns. Right. They don't even know that because the news has moved on to some other rampaging guy. But like I said yesterday in that whole story, it's like when you have 300 million people, it doesn't matter what you do, what goes on. There's always going to be some psycho that does something. That just goes with the territory. It happens, right? It's human nature. It's animal nature. So the idea is that you just want to make sure you're as far away from areas where people are going to go, go psycho, right? The people that, can't, I'm starving, right? And are going at the looters and stuff like that. But there comes a time when it's like, if the power grid goes down, if you're in a grid down situation, if you're in a dystopian type of situation, going to stealing an HD TV, what, an 80-inch plasma TV from some department store is basically a waste of time. And so then it's going to be food. So, but these places, these cities, these states, like California, are just chock full of stuff. These people, so I wouldn't worry about it. I wouldn't worry about it. Now, you may have some psycho neighbors nearby, but I think most of the smaller communities will basically survive all of this. And so you just have to make sure that you're in a position where you can survive. That's all. And thrive and live well. But the farmer's going to leave, is leaving the farm and is going to leave the cattle behind. And we're the cattle. And that's what's going on right now. And everything you see on TV and everything you see, all this talk, all these political nonsense, it's all a ruse. It's all a diversion so that you don't pay attention to that's their thing. That's what Agenda 2030 really is. It's depopulation by the population itself killing off half of the population. That's what it is. They're not coming after you. I don't even believe that some people think, oh, that shot, oh, that's something to do with this or whatever. No. When the farmer leaves the cattle alone to fend for itself, half the herd's going to die off. You see? It's just the way it is. Half the herd's going to die off. Survival of the fittest, unfortunately, and the wrong people will survive. That's the thing. That's the problem. The predators survive. And down the road, decades from now, that'll be a problem. But it won't be a problem decades from now. Now I'm going to blow your mind. And we'll get into this. These shows, one show leads to another, and this will lead into another show. 25 years from now, the sun, there's a 12,068 year cycle of the sun. We're entering a grand solar minimum. So naturally, the earth is cooling, has been cooling. Our growth seasons are going to be shorter. All right. Our crop yields are going to be lessened. Our magnetic field is weakening. Right. And so what's going to happen is the sun, it seems from archaeological record, right, that every 12,000 some years, one guy has it pinned down to 12,068 years. I don't know how exactly they do that, but approximately every 12,000 years. And we know this because we know that the northern latitudes were covered with an ice sheet, between 10 and 12,000 years ago. And then suddenly, we found these flash frozen mammoths that still had food inside their stomachs, undigested food inside their stomachs, meaning they were literally flash frozen, right? And I know this as a matter of fact because I used to work on expeditions to Antarctica, the North Pole, and the Himalayas, and we used to do live dispatches from those areas. So we always had camera equipment and all of that. And so I've seen the mammoths, all right, inside, like on the Russian side of the, you know, the North Pole, what we call the North Pole, the North Atlantic, and so the Arctic Ocean, you know, and yeah, it's a sight to behold. These things are perfectly preserved in ice, and they've even taken to the point where people have cracked through the ice and the hit like a leg, if this doesn't want to gross anybody out, but hit the leg of like the mammoth, and actually it bled, not that it was alive or anything like that, but that the thing was such flash frozen that as they heated this thing up, in other words, this was like just preserved as if you would freeze a body. Okay. And so the blood was still there, and there was still food inside their stomachs when they opened them up. And that happens that happens. There are people that study, they dig ice cores, right? In Greenland and Antarctica. And they go down, and it's like a tree ring. I talked about this once. And people know this. Everyone should know this if they don't. If you've ever seen someone chop a tree or take a chainsaw to a tree or a saw, and you see tree rings, these circles. And each one of those rings stands for a growth year. And so the thicker, they could tell like when it was a good year for growth or a bad year, depending on, the rings. And they could also tell you the age of the tree by how many rings, because each ring represents a growth year, you see, going out. And so people who study tree rings, it's the same with ice cores. They dig down, they pull out this core of ice. And each level of those represents like a year, they could see. And they could see, in certain levels, they could see if a volcano went off, because there'll be volcanic dust, right? They could tell what the atmosphere was at that particular time by the content, all right, the chemical content of the ice, because it was captured. The precipitation it came down, whether the rain or the snow or sleet, whatever it was, that formed these levels of ice. Greenland just didn't become Greenland. You didn't just, there's like 2 miles of ice in Antarctica. It just didn't become, it wasn't like 2 miles of ice, right? Excuse me. That happened over, millennia, right? So when you dig these cores down, you can calculate the year, all right? And so people know when these things happen. That's how they say, okay, an asteroid hit and caused this melting or whatever. We know that the ocean's levels rose, 400 feet, all right, after the melting of the northern ice sheet. So all of these things that people are just simply not aware of. And instead they're worrying about watching used car salesmen talk about some guy who went on a rampage, some random idiot went on a rampage. But out of 300 million, the idea that every twice a year or whatever it is, some psychopath, goes and does some, horrific act out of millions of people, or as we say, 8 billion people on the planet, but in the US, 332 million. That's just a statistical anomaly. It's going to happen. I mean, it's nothing. It's like I was trying to say, even 500 million or 500,000 people dying of a certain thing. When you have 332 million people, that's not even, that's a fraction of a percent of 1%. It's a fraction of a percent. But when it's presented in raw numbers, people go, oh my God, right? That's a lot of people. No, 500,000 people die every year. More than 500,000 people die every year of heart disease. More than 500,000 people die every year of cancer. And you don't see everyone going, oh my God, we have to lock everybody up or do some kind of thing or make sure that we get rid of benzene or that weed stuff that causes cancer. That you could turn on your television and you'll see an ad. They're still selling this stuff. You can go to a box store and buy this, whatever it is. I forget the brand name. I don't want to deal with it. But it's like been proven that it causes cancer, right? I have to keep an eye on my next door neighbor. I have a crazy lady there. It's like, we got to kill weeds. It's like, let the weed. Who gives? Mow the lawn. Whatever. Who cares about the weeds? Excuse me. But you'll see an ad from the law firm of such and such. If you were exposed to this weed killer, please contact the law firm of such and such and such and such. You or a family member died. But you go to a box store, and they're still selling the stuff. Right? The absurdity of this whole thing. Like I said, because the media is the propaganda wing of the corporatocracy. They don't care about us. They never cared. Why would they? Not related to us. They don't know us. They don't care. And like I was saying yesterday, these pictures, I haven't been paying attention because I've been off on this rant. But, we still live in a beautiful world. And that's another thing to keep in mind. That let these cities go crazy. All right? Let these, let the cities go mad. And people be like, jumping over each other and smashing windows and looting and trying to get themselves the latest $200 sneaker. I paid $10 for my sneakers. I don't care about that stuff. So yeah, so don't worry about that stuff. Well, you know what? But anyway, so what I'm saying is by the time we've got about 25 years by the calculations of some of the people I've been following before our sun has what's called a micronova. And we have another one of these events. And these events are like almost near extinction events, but probably not. But that's why we've seen an uptick in volcanic activity. This all has to do with because this affects the Earth's magnetic field. All right. And like I say, we know this from the records. This isn't like weird woo-woo fear-mongering nonsense. This is based on hard science. Okay. And there's people that don't want to accept this because they're part of some game or they want to live there. They're selfish, right? These academics, or these people who are accepting grants from these companies. They want to keep their sports car. They want to keep their big house, right? 25 years is a fairly long time, especially some of these academics who might be 50 years old. They're figuring, well, I'm not going to tell anybody about this. I want to, the average age, the death rate these days is in the late 70s. So they're thinking, well, by the time that happens, I'll probably be dead. They don't care. Like I say, why would they care about us? They're selfish, right? They're selfish. They're not like people like me who do these kinds of things, right? Who share this information. Like I say, I don't make any money. Today I lost because I literally wanted to make the point with that. And I actually bought that stock photo of what's in the background, the truck and the cows, because, I'm into that, I wanted realism. I want my, it's not, I don't put clickbait up. That's what this whole episode was about. So, we got that thing, facing us, in the next 25 years, potentially. May not happen, right? But, we never know. There's been asteroids could hit us, another volcano can go up, super volcanoes happen. Yeah, they keep talking about the big one and St. Andreas Fault and Yellowstone, right? And all this stuff. But if you look right now, Iceland's erupting. uh, you know, Italy's there's erupting in Southeast Asia. There's eruptions. We're clearly entering that cycle again when there's an uptick in volcanic eruptions. And another thing that like people who are into this, like these climate change fools, right? Literally fools. They don't understand that the more volcanic eruptions there are, and there's definitely an uptick, all of this ash gets into the upper atmosphere, and that also cools the planet. So on top of the fact of the matter that we're entering into a grand solar minimum where there's less sunspots on the sun, which basically is fact, it makes the earth warmer during, when we're in solar maximum versus solar minimum. So we're entering a grand solar minimum to begin with, which means the earth is entering a cooling stage. Okay. But on top of that, because of the weakened magnetic field of the earth and the weakened magnetic field of the sun, which helps like extend outside, the planets, that prevents cosmic rays from coming in, which also heat up and cause all kinds of things, that we're seeing this uptick in volcanic eruptions. That's going to cool the planet. So we have to be considered that, in the coming years, you're going to see crop shortages, colder weather, right? All these sorts of things. And that's what the absurd thing about these migrants that are coming from Central America, all right, the paradise, the warm areas, and even further south to the equatorial regions, that they're coming to the US at this particular time when there's no jobs. All right, there won't be any jobs because the those who are still drinking the Kool-Aid, the so-called transhumanists and the technocrats, all right, who are creating all these robotics and automated AI algorithms, kiosks to sell food. I mean, everything is like the job, there's just no jobs, right? And people have gone to college with disease, these got these degrees and all this debt, and they don't know they have no like life skill. They don't know how to do anything, right? And so what good is that? Right? And then these people coming in don't, as bad as the US education system is, which it's gone way downhill over the past couple decades. It's been more of an indoctrination system than it has been an education system. And people have gotten degrees in college that are just, they don't know how to do anything. Well, when people coming up from these southern areas, well, their education system doesn't even, they're very poor educated, right? And less skilled. So, what are they going to do? There's no work for them, So, you could be looking at, like I say, I see in 6 to 18 months, upwards of 50 million or more people unemployed, like in the US alone, right? And, the US used to be like the bread, they talk about certain parts of the US as the bread basket of the world. Forget about that. So, that's going to cause food on top of the cooling and crop shortages here. That's going to cause lack of food in other areas. That's why China last year spent $50 billion and bought all this. And our farmers were fool enough to take it because people want money, right? And so China bought $50 billion worth of U.S. crops. That should have stayed in this country. Because that was one of the biggest mistakes made under the last administration. Not that this administration's any better, but the corporatocracy is in charge anyway. So obviously there was some plan there. That all has to do with whatever their ultimate goal is. But yeah, depopulation is a thing that's going to happen. The people themselves are going to depopulate, and the farmers are leaving the farm, so the cattle are going to be left to fend for themselves, and they don't need us as consumers anymore. It's like the bakeries, just to finish that bakery shop analogy. The baker's saying, look, sorry, I'm only making so many cupcakes and so many loaves of bread and so many bagels or so many whatever. I don't want to put on the extra staff. I don't want to work the extra hours. I'm happy with my life as it is. And and that's it. So the farmer is saying, I'm done. Right? Jeff Bezos left Amazon. I'm done. I got $60 billion. Why should I? Well, I'm done. Yeah. And that's what people don't get. And then you got these crazy people like Elon Musk talking about, oh, we're going to like build some, a base on Mars and stuff. Like, why? I found this sound effects today.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4.
Like, why?
2, 1, 0.
I don't know if you can hear that or not. Rocket launch. Why? We just sent a rover to Mars. We know what Mars looks like, right? We know what it looks like. It's not a livable planet. There was probably life on Mars 1 million years ago, or maybe even 12,000 years ago, if this cycle, or at least 36,000 years ago. That's a whole other story. But there's it's useless. There's no reason to go there. Not at all, none whatsoever. So meanwhile, this is what people will be doing this summer. They'll be mowing their lawns, completely oblivious to everything that's going on in the world, right? Caught up in the cult of personality, thinking some candidate is going to come in and save them, some political candidate. They'll be watching, glued to the media, news junkies, thinking that, looking at politics as pop culture, not even aware that there's a beautiful planet and nature out there, just in their own little thing, mowing their stupid lawn, going and buying little trinkets to make their houses look like something out of a magazine or a sitcom on the television show. And meanwhile, everything's collapsing, and the farmer is leaving is leaving the farm. Yeah, it's a crazy concept, and it's really crazy and insane. But like I said, if you want to survive, just get out of those areas. Because those people are going to be pretty busy for a fairly long period of time. They're not going to be coming out of there because there's nothing outside. They don't know, people who are city folk, so to speak, generational city folk, inner city people, they don't even have cars, so they don't even have licenses. But I used to live in New York. Most people didn't even have a license. I was watching a guy in New York. He just got who does these things. He's thinking of moving out. Some YouTuber. And he just got his license. I used to know so many people when I lived in New York. They just didn't have a license because, they took a cab, subway, or, and even recently they got those bikes and those bike lanes and things. It's like people don't, And so now LA people drive. That's for sure. But most of the sane people, I think, have left LA by now. you know, and a lot of them have moved to Texas, and that may be a problem for people in Texas. And there are many New Yorkers who could afford it. They moved down to Florida, and that may be a problem for some people in Florida. But, you know, it's a big country. It's a big world. It's a beautiful world. And there are communities and people get together. Not everybody's nuts, you know. Not everybody's going to go crazy. Not every community is going to go crazy. Certain communities will come together. But the big cities, you know, the desperate people who don't really care, never, the type of people that, like I say, the non-player character NPCs, the people who don't really have consciences, like they don't, they have no empathy. They're just self-centered. Their whole life is they live self-centered lives, right? Selfish people. They don't see anything else. It's like the people you got to watch out for when you're out in the road, because they're just driving along. They're not even looking. They don't, in their mind, there's nobody else. They're the only one on the planet. Those are the people you got to look out for. That's why you got to be, drive defensive, but that has nothing to do with anything. Well, anyway, I'm going to end it there. What's going to happen when the farmer leaves the farm? I'll leave you with that thought. And don't forget, if you live in the mid-Atlantic states, we got some serious wind coming up. 60-mile-an-hour gusts. That's pretty strong. So you better tie down whatever you've got loose in your backyard and things like that, because that stuff's going to be blowing all over the place. But other than that, today's going to be a beautiful day, 74 degrees where I live. Good morning. So have a good morning. I hope this wasn't too much of a downer. Thanks for, hanging in there. Thanks for watching. Appreciate it. Thanks for the comments. And I'll see you probably
Same time, same station.
and we'll just see how it goes. Take care. Cheers. Good luck getting through all this nonsense.